My brother tried to dilute my organic honey business with cheap syrup, so I used laboratory pollen tracking to nullify his retail contracts. Please keep this account entirely detached from my professional portfolio, as my business operates within a highly regulated agricultural market, and my legal counsel has advised me to maintain strict separation between my personal history and my commercial brand. If you frequently listen to digital storytelling channels, you are likely familiar with narratives detailing deep family fractures over inherited wealth or real estate. However, my situation demonstrates how far individuals will go when they attempt to commodify someone else's specialized scientific knowledge and physical labor. My family truly believed that a shared biological connection granted them an automatic right to exploit my intellectual property, expecting that my reserved nature would prevent me from enforcing the legal protections I had established. My name is Hannah. I am 27 years old, and I am an agricultural biochemist and the sole founder of Aura Gold Apiaries, a premium, single-origin organic honey production company. To understand how my enterprise became the target of a calculated family intervention, you must first understand the environment created by my mother, Evelyn. For as long as I can remember, Evelyn viewed our family through a lens of rigid social positioning. My older brother, Derek, who is now 30, was always her chosen representative for family excellence. Derek possessed a superficial charisma and a talent for smooth public speaking, which Evelyn constantly mistook for genuine business acumen. I, conversely, was the quiet daughter who preferred the quiet predictability of laboratory environments and field research. When Derek decided to pursue an expensive, unaccredited corporate leadership program overseas, Evelyn gladly emptied her primary investment accounts to fund his tuition, his luxury apartment, and his extensive networking travels. When I turned 18 and earned a partial scholarship to study agricultural biochemistry, my mother informed me that any remaining tuition, lab fees, and living expenses were entirely my responsibility. She explained that resources had to be preserved for Derek because he was destined to build a substantial corporate legacy, whereas my interest in apiculture and microbiology was merely a rustic hobby. I accepted this without protest. I worked 20 hours a week in the university's plant pathology lab, lived in substandard student housing, and poured every spare moment into understanding the precise chemistry of honey production. While I was completing my master's thesis on the geographic profiling of pollen matrices, Derek was burning through his third major capital injection from Evelyn. He had launched a luxury lifestyle app that failed within 8 months due to exorbitant marketing costs and zero functional utility. Rather than holding him accountable, Evelyn comforted him, attributing the failure to a volatile market, and immediately began looking for his next venture. By the time I turned 25, my research had yielded something extraordinary. I had developed a proprietary, mobile apiary management system that optimized bee health and maximized the purity of monofloral honey derived from a single plant species, such as lavender or white clover. I secured a modest agricultural startup loan, leased a pristine tract of protected valley land far from commercial pesticide usage, and built Aura Gold apiaries from the ground up. I didn't just manage hives, I ran a precise scientific operation. Every single batch of honey was rigorously tested via refractometry to ensure optimal moisture content and maximum enzyme retention. Within 2 years, the dedication paid off. Aura Gold apiaries caught the attention of Elysian Foods, a high-end nationwide health and wellness distributor that supplies premium organic products to luxury grocery chains. They offered me an exclusive distribution contract worth hundreds of thousands of dollars annually, with a stipulation for strict quality control. The contract required that every shipment pass independent purity standards, certifying that the honey was entirely raw, organic, and completely unadulterated by external sugars. It was a life-altering milestone that validated years of exhausting physical labor and isolation. Naively, I shared this success during a rare family dinner at Evelyn's home. I believed that achieving financial independence and national corporate validation would finally earn me my mother's respect. The reaction, however, was chillingly transactional. Derek didn't congratulate me. He immediately began asking about my profit margins, my shipping volume, and the precise wording of my exclusivity clause with Elysian Foods. Evelyn sat back, her eyes narrowing with calculation, before saying, "Hannah, this is exactly the kind of stability Derek needs for his next portfolio project. You have the technical skills, but Derek has the executive presence to scale this into a true corporate entity. We should merge your apiary under a new parent company managed by your brother." I looked at my mother, then at my brother, who was already nodding smoothly as if my life's work was a communal asset waiting to be redistributed. "No," I said firmly, keeping my voice entirely level. "Aura Gold is my company. I own 100% of the equity. I hold the agricultural permits. and I am the sole signatory on the Elysian contract. I am not merging with anyone. The atmosphere instantly turned hostile. Derek sneered, accusing me of being selfish and incapable of understanding macro-scale economics. Evelyn told me I was turning my back on family solidarity. I left the dinner early, realizing that my success hadn't earned their respect. It had merely awakened their greed. 3 weeks later, Derek announced on his social media platforms that he was launching Crestwood Harvest, a premium organic wellness brand specializing in locally sourced, artisanal raw honey. I initially felt a wave of relief, thinking he had finally decided to build something of his own. What I didn't realize was that Derek had no intention of investing the years required to establish healthy bee colonies or maintain complex agricultural standards. He had discovered that the regional distribution network had a massive demand for organic honey, and he intended to use my proximity to fulfill it. Because I needed a secure, temperature-controlled environment to store my bulk raw honey barrels before final bottling and pickup by Elysian Foods, I had leased a section of a commercial cooperative agricultural warehouse. The facility was managed by an independent board, but my mother held a minor financial interest in the parent cooperative. Using her administrative access, she quietly added Derek's new corporate entity to the facility registry, giving him full access to the shared loading bays and processing zones. I arrived at the warehouse on a Tuesday morning to find my brother standing next to a fleet of unmarked commercial flatbeds. He was wearing a pristine corporate polo shirt, overseeing the unloading of dozens of industrial plastic drums that looked entirely different from my high-grade stainless steel apiary barrels. "What is this, Derek?" I asked, walking up to the staging area. He smiled, a polished, insufferable expression of corporate confidence. "Just expanding my footprint, little sister. Crestwood Harvest just secured a secondary vendor contract with regional health stores. Since we're family, I figured we could share the processing space. It saves us both on overhead." A deep sense of unease settled in my stomach. I looked past him at the industrial drums. They bore no agricultural inspection stickers, no organic certification seals, and no origin tracking codes. My brother had entered my industry, bypassed every single scientific and ethical standard I stood for, and positioned himself directly adjacent to my supply chain. I knew right then that this wasn't an innocent business venture. It was a parasitic intervention designed to extract value from my reputation, and I needed to watch every single gram of inventory with absolute precision. Within a month of Derek's arrival at the cooperative warehouse, the operational harmony of Origold apiaries began to fracture in subtle, troubling ways. As a biochemist, I rely heavily on analytical data rather than intuition. My first indication of a systemic issue occurred during a routine quality assurance check on batch Luda premium wild lavender honey intended for Elysian Foods' flagship East Coast locations. I drew a sample from one of my sealed stainless steel storage barrels and placed it into our digital refractometer to measure the moisture content and total dissolved solids. The reading was anomalous. The moisture profile was elevated, and the specific gravity did not align with the strict density parameters of pure, cold-filtered raw honey. Puzzled, I took a secondary sample from a deep core valve within the barrel. When I ran a basic chemical purity assay, my heart dropped. The sample indicated a significant concentration of exogenous oligosaccharides, specifically chemical markers consistent with high fructose corn syrup and mass-produced industrial rice syrup. My pristine, organic honey had been systematically diluted. I immediately locked down the remaining 9 barrels from that specific harvest lot, preventing them from being loaded onto the Elysian Foods transport vehicles. If a single one of those adulterated barrels had reached the distributor's laboratory, my exclusive contract would have been terminated instantly for material breach of product integrity, and my brand would have been blacklisted from the premium market permanently. I reviewed our internal security logs. My small team of 3 field assistants had no access to the bulk storage valves after hours. However, the warehouse's shared main bay log showed that Derek and his nighttime logistics crew had been conducting inventory optimization in our exact sector for 3 consecutive evenings, instead of engaging in an emotional, unproductive confrontation that my mother would inevitably dismiss as a sisterly grievance. I decided to let science construct my case. I took samples from 4 different locations within my affected barrels, along with a secret swipe sample from the residue remaining on one of Derek's industrial plastic drums parked near the loading bay. I transferred them directly to the regional university's agricultural diagnostic department, commissioning a comprehensive melisopylinology analysis and a carbon isotope ratio mass spectrometry test. Melisopylinology technology is the precise study of pollen contained within honey. It allows a trained scientist to identify the exact botanical and geographical origin of the product by mapping the microscopic pollen grains under a high-powered electron microscope. A genuine bottle of Origold honey should only contain the pollen signatures of our local valley flora, specifically wild lavender, white clover, and native alfalfa. 3 days later, Dr. Amanda Cross, the lead palynologist at the university, called me into her office. She pushed a digital telemetry report across her desk, her expression deeply concerned. "Hannah, these results are incredibly alarming," Dr. Cross explained, pointing to the magnified imagery on her screen. "Your standard pollen profile has been completely overwhelmed by foreign elements. We found massive traces of Brassicaceae pollen native to large-scale industrial farming regions in another country, alongside significant quantities of highly processed, ultra-filtered corn and cane sugars that contain zero pollen whatsoever. This isn't accidental cross-contamination. Someone is systematically draining your premium raw honey, replacing the volume with cheap, imported commercial syrup bulked out with low-grade foreign honey, and mixing it back into your supply." The strategy was clear. Derek was stealing my high-value organic product to fill his own high-end orders for Crestwood Harvest, while refilling my barrels with a cheap, industrially altered sugar mixture to hide the theft. He believed that because honey looks uniform to the naked eye, a quiet tech nerd wouldn't notice the difference until it was far too late. He didn't realize that every flower leaves a microscopic, permanent geographic passport in its nectar. Armed with the certified laboratory reports, I scheduled a private meeting with our family attorney, Rachel Sterling. Rachel had managed our late grandfather's estate and was known for her absolute adherence to corporate and agricultural law. She reviewed the mass spectrometry findings and the pollen tracking data with a grim expression. "This crosses the line from a civil business dispute straight into structural corporate fraud and food labeling misrepresentation," Rachel stated, her pen tapping rhythmically against the mahogany desk. "Your brother didn't just compromise your inventory. He used a shared commercial facility to commit agricultural product tampering. If we file a standard lawsuit, the litigation will take months, and the public filing could damage your reputation with Elysian Foods before we get a judgment." "I don't want a standard lawsuit, Rachel," I replied calmly. "I want to isolate the infection before it destroys my brand." Derek just signed a major regional vendor agreement with 3 independent health food supermarket chains under the guise of being a local organic producer. He is using my stolen product and his diluted syrup to fulfill those contracts. "I want to use the science to invalidate his entire commercial presence." Rachel smiled. A sharp, formidable expression. "If that is your goal, we don't look for an apology. We look for the compliance metrics." Every major retail contract contains an absolute guarantee of regulatory compliance and product authenticity. We will let the distributors do the enforcement for us. That weekend, I attended a pre-planned family gathering at my mother's residence, intentionally playing the role of the stressed, overwhelmed small business owner. I sat at the table, quietly sipping my tea, while Derek holding court at the head of the table, loudly boasting about his new corporate distribution numbers. "It's all about scaling and market penetration. Mother," Derek explained, adjusting his expensive watch, "Crestwood Harvest is on track to clear 50,000 units by the end of the quarter. Retailers are begging for local organic options. Some people just don't have the vision to maximize their assets." Evelyn beamed, looking at him with absolute pride. "I always knew you had the executive instinct, Derek. It's a shame your sister didn't want to partner with you. She could have learned how a real business operates." I looked down at my plate, letting a soft, submissive sigh escape my lips. "It's been difficult lately," I murmured, ensuring my voice sounded appropriately strained. "We've had some consistency issues with our recent batches, so I've had to hold back our shipping volumes to re-verify our metrics." Derek's eyes flashed with a sudden, predatory gleam of satisfaction. "Well, Hannah, that's what happens when you focus too much on the science instead of the supply chain. If you ever find yourself defaulting on your commitments, let me know. Crestwood Harvest is more than ready to take over your warehouse footprint. I'll keep that in mind." "Derek," I said softly. I left the house that evening knowing that his absolute arrogance had completely blinded him. He truly believed he had committed the perfect intellectual heist, completely unaware that the laboratory data was already compiled, the legal notices were drafted, and the countdown on his artificial empire had already begun. The primary advantage of resolving a conflict through objective scientific data is that facts do not possess emotional vulnerabilities. They cannot be influenced by parental favoritism or smooth rhetorical presentations. On On Thursday morning, Rachel Sterling and I submitted our comprehensive analytical dossier directly to the Quality Assurance and Compliance Division of Verdant Markets, the regional grocery chain that represented 80% of Derek's commercial revenue for Crestwood Harvest. The dossier contained the certified melisopolinology reports from the university, the carbon isotope ratio mass spectrometry printouts, and time-stamped warehouse access records detailing the unauthorized access to my storage sectors. Because the modern retail grocery sector faces massive legal liabilities for food fraud and deceptive labeling. Verdant Markets maintains a zero-tolerance policy for product adulteration. The response was immediate. Their corporate compliance team initiated an unannounced emergency product integrity audit on every single unit of Crestwood Harvest currently sitting on their distribution shelves. Was working in my laboratory space at the apiary the following afternoon when my phone began vibrating continuously. It was Evelyn. I let it ring 3 times before calmly sliding the screen to answer. Hannah. My mother's voice was strained, completely stripped of its usual curated composure. You need to come to the cooperative warehouse immediately. There is a complete crisis. 2 regional compliance officers and a county agricultural representative are here with a legal hold order. They are sealing Derek's entire inventory. I am aware, Mother, I responded, keeping my tone completely rhythmic and unbothered. I am the one who provided the scientific data that triggered the audit. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the line, followed by a sharp gasp. You did what? How could you betray your own brother like this? He is on the verge of a massive corporate expansion. Derek didn't expand a business, Mother. He committed industrial food fraud, systematically sabotaged my organic certification, and stole my raw product to cover his own logistical incompetence. I will see you at the warehouse. When I arrived at the facility, the scene was entirely devoid of the corporate glamour Derek usually projected. Yellow regulatory tape was stretched across the Crestwood Harvest staging zone. 2 uniformed compliance inspectors were systematically placing security seals on my brother's industrial plastic drums. Derek was standing near the loading bay, his face pale, sweat ruining the collar of his designer shirt, desperately trying to explain something to a calm, unyielding municipal enforcement officer. Evelyn rushed toward me the moment I stepped through the door, her hands trembling as she grabbed my arm. Hannah, talk to them. Tell them there's been a mistake in the testing parameters. If this contract is canceled, the financial penalties will wipe out his corporate entity, and the bank will call in the personal loans I co-signed. I gently but firmly disengaged her hand from my sleeve. There is no mistake, Mother. Dr. Cross ran the analysis 3 separate times. Derek was draining my high-value monofloral honey, replacing the volume with commercial high-fructose corn syrup, and packaging my stolen harvest under his label. The microscopic pollen profile in his jars belongs to agricultural zones halfway across the globe, not our valley. Derek turned around, his eyes wide with a mixture of desperate rage and absolute panic. Hannah, please, we can settle this internally. I'll pay you back for the volume variance. I'll give you a percentage of the brand. If Verdant Markets pulls the contract for food fraud, I'm barred from the retail registry for life. You should have considered the metrics before you altered my inventory, Derek, I said, looking him directly in the eye. You called me a code-dependent hobbyist who didn't understand macroeconomics. You believed that because I am quiet, I would allow you to compromise my life's work to fund your lifestyle. You didn't realize that every single batch I produce carries a permanent molecular signature. The legal and financial fallout was swift and total. By Monday morning, Verdant Markets officially terminated their vendor agreement with Crestwood Harvest for material non-compliance and intentional consumer deception. Under the standard terms of their retail contract, they levied a massive product recall penalty fee against his company to cover the cost of removing his items from every store shelf in the region because the product tampering occurred within a certified cooperative warehouse. The independent facility board voted unanimously to permanently revoke Derek's commercial lease and terminate my mother's administrative access for security violations. With his revenue streams reduced to absolute zero and his brand name permanently flagged on the National Food Registry, Derek's corporate entity collapsed into immediate insolvency. The personal financial guarantees my mother had proudly signed for him were triggered by the commercial lenders 3 weeks later. To avoid a complete foreclosure scenario, Evelyn was forced to liquidate her secondary real estate investments and downsize her personal residence, completely eroding the financial safety net she had spent a lifetime accumulating for her golden child. 2 months after the audit, I finalized a relocation of Aura Gold apiaries to an entirely private, independent production facility located 60 miles north, completely severed from any cooperative boards or family connections. Elysian Foods, Deeply impressed by my rigorous internal quality controls and my refusal to allow compromised inventory to reach their supply chain, expanded our exclusive contract globally, doubling our annual order volume. Yesterday evening, Evelyn tried to reach me through a messaging app, sending a long, emotionally manipulative paragraph detailing how Derek was now working an entry-level inventory job at a local shipping depot and how they were struggling to manage their new compressed living expenses. She asked if I could find a place for him within my expanding laboratory team. For the sake of family unity, I did not reply. I took a screenshot of the message for my legal archive, permanently blocked the profile, and returned to my laboratory bench. People within our local agricultural circle occasionally ask me if I regret taking such a clinical, unyielding approach against my biological family. But as I stand in my pristine, state-of-the-art facility, watching the automated refractometers verify the absolute purity of our highest volume harvest yet, knowing that my brand is entirely secure and my independence is absolute, I recognize that science taught me the most valuable lesson of all. When a system contains an incurable contaminant, you don't compromise with it. You eliminate it from the matrix completely.